9,000 years ago, before the pyramids, before writing, before the wheel, something colossal was carved into the Egyptian bedrock. Today, the Great Sphinx of Giza still guards its secret, staring east with a face that doesn't match its body. Archaeologists say one pharaoh built it. Geologists point to weathering that shouldn't exist, if they're right. And a growing number of researchers are asking an uncomfortable question. What if the story we've been told is missing thousands of years? The monument that shouldn't make sense. On the Giza Plateau, just outside modern Cairo, a limestone lion with a human head has been staring at the sunrise for thousands of years. It's called the Great Sphinx, and it is, by almost any measure, one of the strangest objects on Earth. It stretches about 73 meters long, that's longer than a football field, and it stands roughly 20 meters high, about the height of a 6-story building. It was not built, it was carved. Ancient workers cut directly into the natural limestone bedrock of the plateau, removing everything that wasn't the Sphinx, the way a sculptor works a block of marble, except this block was the size of a small hill. That fact alone makes the Sphinx different from almost every other ancient monument. The pyramids nearby were built by stacking stone blocks on top of each other. The Sphinx was made by digging down and cutting away. Once you carve away bedrock, you can't put it back. There's no redo. Whoever did this had to know exactly what they were doing before they started. And yet, despite the Sphinx being one of the most photographed objects in human history, we still don't have a document, an inscription, or a single ancient text that says in plain words, "I built this, and here is when." That single missing fact is the root of everything that follows. For most of the 20th century, mainstream Egyptology settled on an answer. The Sphinx was built around 2500 BCE, during the reign of the pharaoh Khafre, as part of his pyramid complex. This is still the position held by the Egyptian government, most universities, and most textbooks. It is a reasonable, evidence-based position, and we're going to walk through exactly why archaeologists believe it. But it's not the only position. Since the 1990s, a smaller but persistent group of geologists, engineers, and independent researchers has argued that the physical weathering on the Sphinx's body tells a different story, one that could push its origin back thousands of years earlier, to a period before the accepted timeline of Egyptian civilization even begins. This isn't a fringe internet rumor invented for clickbait. It was presented at the 1992 annual meeting of the Geological Society of America, one of the most respected geology conferences in the world, by a geologist named Robert Schoch. That single presentation split Egyptology and geology into two camps that still haven't fully reconciled, more than 30 years later. In this documentary, we're not going to tell you which side is obviously right. We're going to show you the actual evidence, the tool marks, the erosion patterns, the missing nose, the buried temples, the debates between world-class scientists, and let you see why this argument has lasted for over a century. Because here's the truth. The Sphinx isn't mysterious because nobody has studied it. It's mysterious because the people who've studied it hardest, most carefully, with the best equipment available, still don't fully agree on what they're looking at. Let's start with what we actually know for certain. What we actually know for certain. Before getting into theories, it helps to separate fact from speculation. So here is what virtually every archaeologist, geologist, and historian agrees on, regardless of which side of the debate they're on. The body of the Sphinx, including the lion's torso, legs, and base, is carved from a single piece of bedrock. It is part of the natural plateau itself. Ancient workers dug a horseshoe-shaped trench around a hill of stone and then carved that isolated block into the shape we see today. Some smaller repair pieces, including parts of the paws, were added later using separate blocks. But the core body is solid, natural rock. The limestone here formed underwater millions of years ago. Giza sits on limestone that was laid down when this part of Egypt was covered by a shallow sea, tens of millions of years before humans existed. That rock formed in layers, with some harder and some softer than others. That becomes important later in this story because different layers can weather at dramatically different rates. The head is also proportionally smaller than the body. Look at the Sphinx from the side, and something seems slightly off. The head appears too small for such a massive lion's body. Most researchers on all sides of this debate agree that the head was recarved at some point, probably reshaped from an original larger head into a new design, likely a royal portrait. This single detail turns out to be a major clue, and we'll come back to it. Right next to the Sphinx are two temples, the Sphinx Temple and the Valley Temple. They were built from massive limestone blocks, and some Egyptologists believe these blocks were quarried directly from the trench dug around the Sphinx itself. The temples also use a similar building style, with huge core blocks that were later covered with polished granite and limestone. Then there is the stone tablet known as the Dream Stele, standing between the Sphinx's paws. It was placed there by a pharaoh named Thutmose IV more than 1,000 years after the commonly accepted construction date. On the stele, Thutmose describes a dream in which the Sphinx spoke to him, promising him the throne of Egypt if he cleared away the sand that had buried it up to its neck. This tells us something important. By around 1400 BCE, the Sphinx was already ancient, already half-buried, and already being treated as a sacred and mysterious relic rather than a recent monument. And finally, nobody has ever found an inscription from the original builders explicitly naming who carved the Sphinx or when it was created. This is the detail that makes this whole documentary possible. Almost every ancient monument we can confidently date has some kind of supporting evidence, whether that is an inscription, a building record, a tomb painting, or an administrative document. The Sphinx has none of that directly attached to it. Every date assigned to its construction is inferred from surrounding evidence rather than stated outright. Those 6 facts are the foundation. Now let's look at how archaeologists built the mainstream timeline from that foundation, and it is a genuinely clever piece of detective work. The case for Pharaoh Khafre. To understand why most Egyptologists date the Sphinx to around 2500 BCE, you have to understand the broader Giza Plateau, because the Sphinx doesn't exist in isolation. It's part of a planned complex. Giza has 3 major pyramids built for 3 pharaohs of Egypt's 4th dynasty, Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure. Khufu built the Great Pyramid, the largest of the 3. His son, Khafre, built the 2nd pyramid, slightly smaller, but positioned on higher ground so it actually looks taller from certain angles. And the Sphinx sits directly next to Khafre's pyramid complex, connected to it by a causeway and sharing a quarry. This is the core evidence for Khafre as the builder. Geologists have shown that the trench dug around the Sphinx to isolate it, the same trench that gave the Sphinx its shape, appears to be the source of much of the limestone used to build the nearby Sphinx Temple and Valley Temple. And those temples are architecturally linked to Khafre's pyramid complex through their layout, their construction technique, and their location. If the Sphinx enclosure supplied the stone for Khafre's temples, that strongly suggests they were built as one coordinated project. Then there's the face. This is the piece most people have heard of. In 1817, and more thoroughly during later excavations, archaeologists found a badly damaged statue near the Sphinx bearing Khafre's name. Some Egyptologists, most notably Selim Hassan in the 1930s, argued that the facial features of the Sphinx resemble known statues of Khafre. This comparison has been debated for decades. Faces on ancient Egyptian statues were often idealized rather than realistic, so resemblance is not ironclad proof, but it remains part of the traditional case. There's also the inventory stela, an ancient stone tablet found in the 1850s that claims the Sphinx already existed during the time of an even earlier pharaoh, Khufu. If that were true, it would push the Sphinx's origin back before Khafre, to his father's era, or possibly even earlier. However, and this is important, the tablet's writing style and grammar match a much later period of Egyptian history, roughly 1500 years after Khufu. Most Egyptologists believe it is a later religious text, written by priests trying to link their temple to famous ancient royalty rather than a first-hand historical record. It's often compared to how a modern building might display a plaque claiming false ancient origins to seem more impressive. So, while the inventory stela is fascinating, most scholars consider it unreliable evidence rather than proof of an earlier Sphinx. Egyptologists also point to the broader architectural pattern. Old Kingdom Egypt, the era of Khufu and Khafre, was exactly the period when Egyptians were mastering large-scale stone construction, developing the tools, the labor organization, and the religious motivation needed to build monuments at this scale. The Sphinx fits neatly into that broader wave of pyramid building, which lasted roughly from 2600 to 2500 BCE. Put together, this is a coherent, evidence-based argument. It's not just a guess. It connects quarrying evidence, architectural layout, religious context, and a documented era of monumental stone construction. But it's not airtight. And the crack in this theory doesn't come from mythology or ancient aliens. It comes from geology, the weathering problem. In the late 1980s, a Boston University geologist named Robert Schoch was invited by independent researcher John Anthony West to examine the Sphinx enclosure, not the statue's face, but the deep trench walls surrounding its body. Schoch wasn't looking for a lost civilization. He was a geologist doing what geologists do, reading the rock. What he found was strange. The walls of the Sphinx enclosure show deep, rolling, vertical fissures, grooves that run up and down the rock in a wave-like pattern. Schoch, along with seismologist Thomas Dobecki, argued that this specific pattern is a signature of prolonged, heavy rainfall erosion, the kind of weathering you get from centuries of water running down a rock face, not from wind and sand. Giza's climate has been desert dry, with only occasional light rain, for roughly the last 5,000 years. If the Sphinx was carved around 2500 BCE as Khafra's monument, it would have sat in a desert climate for its entire existence. Wind and sand erosion in a desert produces a very different pattern, a smoother, more horizontal kind of erosion, sometimes called flaking or honeycomb weathering, not the deep vertical rain channels Schoch was describing. But other structures on the Giza Plateau, built later during Khafra's own era using the same type of limestone, show the expected desert-style erosion, not the deep water grooves seen on the Sphinx enclosure walls. So Schoch asked an uncomfortable question. If the Sphinx enclosure shows heavy water erosion and nearby 4th Dynasty structures made of the same stone don't, doesn't that suggest the Sphinx is older, old enough to have existed during a wetter climate period in Egypt's history? Climate scientists do agree that Egypt went through a much wetter phase, often called the Neolithic subpluvial or Green Sahara period, where seasonal monsoon rains reached much further north than they do today. That wet period is generally dated from around 9000 BCE to roughly 3000 BCE, tapering off as the region dried into the desert we recognize now. If Schoch's water erosion reading is correct, and if it requires that much older, wetter climate to explain it, the math gets uncomfortable for the traditional timeline. It would mean the Sphinx's body, not necessarily the head, remember, which was likely recarved later, might have first been shaped thousands of years before Khafra, potentially as far back as 7000 or even 9000 BCE, during a period we currently have no evidence of organized monument-building civilization in Egypt at all. Schoch presented this argument formally at the 1992 Geological Society of America conference in San Diego. It caused an immediate stir. Some geologists in the room reportedly found the water erosion argument geologically sound, even if the historical implications were explosive. It was covered by major outlets at the time, and it remains one of the most cited alternative dating arguments in Egyptology to this day. So does that settle it? Not even close. Because Egyptologists pushed back hard, and their counter-arguments are just as grounded in real science. Why most Egyptologists disagree. The water erosion theory did not go unanswered. Some of the most detailed rebuttals came from geologist Kay Lalgari and Egyptologist Mark Lenner, who has spent decades doing hands-on fieldwork at Giza, quite literally mapping the Sphinx stone by stone. Critics argue that the vertical grooves Schoch identified as rain erosion could instead be caused by a different, purely desert-compatible process, something geologists call case hardening combined with salt weathering. Limestone contains layers of different hardness. When exposed to wind, dew, and small amounts of moisture, softer inner layers can erode faster than harder outer layers, and salts trapped inside the rock can crystallize and fracture the surface as they expand and contract with temperature and tiny amounts of humidity. Over thousands of years, this can produce grooved, undulating patterns that look at a glance similar to rain channels, without requiring heavy rainfall at all. Lenner and others argue that comparing the Sphinx enclosure walls to nearby tombs isn't a clean, apples-to-apples comparison, because those structures use different quality limestone from different layers of the plateau, some more resistant to weathering than others. Different rock, they argue, weathers differently, even sitting in the same climate for the same number of years. That alone, they say, could explain why the Sphinx enclosure looks more eroded without needing a different, older date. Excavations around the Sphinx and its temples have also found pottery, tools, and construction debris that are firmly dated through multiple independent methods to the 4th Dynasty during Khafra's era. If the Sphinx had actually been built thousands of years earlier, we would expect to eventually find some trace of an advanced, organized society capable of large-scale stone cutting from that earlier period, including its tools, settlements, and burial sites. So far, none of that has turned up anywhere in Egypt from that time frame. This leads to perhaps the single biggest scientific objection. Carving something the size of the Sphinx isn't a casual weekend project. It requires organized labor, food surplus, to support workers who aren't farming, specialized tools, planning, and leadership. Archaeologists have gotten very good at finding traces of past societies through settlements, burial sites, garbage pits, and tools. For a hypothetical pre-3000 BCE Sphinx building culture in Egypt, there is simply no corroborating trace of that civilization anywhere else in the archaeological record. Extraordinary monuments generally don't appear with zero supporting cultural footprint. This is where the debate has essentially sat, unresolved, for over 30 years. Robert Schoch has continued defending and refining his geological argument in later papers. Mark Lehner and most of the mainstream Egyptological community maintain the Khafre-era dating. Neither side has produced a single piece of evidence powerful enough to fully convince the other. That's not a failure of science. That's what science actually looks like when the evidence is genuinely ambiguous, a real, ongoing professional disagreement, not a cover-up and not a mystery box waiting for a chatbot to solve it. The face, the nose, and the missing pieces. Let's zoom in on the Sphinx's face because it holds two of the most talked about mysteries connected to this monument. As mentioned earlier, the head appears too small for the body. The most widely accepted explanation is that the original head was larger, shaped more like a full lion's head, and was later recarved into a smaller, more human, royal-looking head, most likely to represent a specific pharaoh. Recarving a head down to a smaller size is physically possible. The reverse is not, since you can't add stone back. That directional detail, you can only carve stone away, never add it, is actually a clever piece of evidence because it tells us reshaping definitely happened at some point, even if we can't be 100% sure exactly when or by whom. If the body is significantly older than the head, as some researchers argue, that would explain something that has puzzled visitors for centuries: why the proportions look slightly wrong. It wouldn't be one sculpture from one moment in time. It could be an ancient form that was later updated with a new face by a later ruler wanting to associate himself with an already ancient sacred monument. Then there's the missing nose. Nearly everyone has heard the myth that Napoleon soldiers shot the nose off the Sphinx with a cannon during his 1798 Egyptian campaign. This story is almost certainly false, and we know that because of drawings that predate Napoleon by more than a century. A Danish explorer named Frederick Louis Norden sketched the Sphinx in the 1730s, decades before Napoleon was even born, and his drawings already show a Sphinx without a nose. Written Arabic sources give a more likely explanation. The 15th century historian al-Makrizi recorded that a Sufi named Muhammad Saim al-Dar vandalized the Sphinx's face in the 1300s, reportedly angered by local peasants making offerings to it, which he considered idolatry. According to this account, he was later executed for the act. Whether every detail of that story is perfectly accurate, it's a far better documented explanation than the Napoleon myth. And it shows how easily a simple, dramatic, false story can outcompete a real, sourced historical one. That's a pattern that matters a lot when evaluating sensational headlines about ancient Egypt today. Buried in sand. One detail that gets lost in most retellings: the Sphinx has been buried up to its neck in wind-blown desert sand, repeatedly throughout its history. This alone tells us something important about how ancient people related to it. The dream stele of Thutmose IV, which we mentioned earlier, describes the Sphinx already sand-covered and half-forgotten by around 1400 BCE, which, even under the mainstream dating, is already more than 1,000 years after its supposed construction under Khafre. That means for over a millennia, this massive monument was periodically swallowed by the desert and had to be re-excavated, again and again, by different generations. Records show excavation efforts under multiple pharaohs, then later under Roman rule, when the Sphinx was a tourist attraction for Roman visitors who left graffiti near its paws. It was buried again for centuries afterward. Major modern excavation didn't fully clear the body until the early 20th century, primarily led by French engineer Émile Barrès, starting in 1925 and completed in stages afterward. For much of its recorded history, arguably most of its existence, this eternal guardian spent more time buried than visible. This matters for the weathering debate, too. Sand burial actually protects stone from active erosion. A body buried in sand isn't being rained on or sandblasted by wind, it's essentially preserved in a natural time capsule. Schoch and his supporters argue this strengthens their case. If the deep water-grooved erosion happened before repeated burial episodes, the erosion had to occur early in a wetter climate, rather than gradually over thousands of comparatively dry, sand-protected years. Critics counter that we don't have precise, verified records of exactly how much of the enclosure walls were exposed versus buried during each historical period, which makes it hard to calculate erosion rates with real confidence either way. Once again, solid points on both sides and no final answer. What modern science is actually doing to solve this? This is the part most viral videos skip entirely because it's less dramatic than stunning secret revealed, but it's the most honest part of the story. Modern researchers aren't relying on guesswork or ancient legend. They're using real tools. Teams, including work connected to Thomas DeBakey alongside Schoch's original study, have used seismic refraction surveys, essentially reading how sound waves travel through rock beneath and around the Sphinx, to map subsurface density and structure without digging. Some of this work has fueled speculation about hidden chambers beneath the paws, though no confirmed hidden room has ever been verified through peer-reviewed, independently replicated excavation. Multiple research teams have also laser scanned the Sphinx down to millimeter precision, creating detailed digital models of every crack, groove, and weathering pattern. This allows geologists to study erosion patterns far more precisely than earlier researchers, working mostly from direct observation. Ongoing studies continue comparing weathering on the Sphinx enclosure to other confidently dated Old Kingdom structures nearby, refining the debate Schoch and Lehner started back in the 1990s. Independent of the Sphinx debate entirely, climate scientists have been steadily refining the timeline of the Green Sahara period using ice cores, lake sediment layers, and cave formations across North Africa. This research feeds directly back into the Sphinx question because it helps pin down exactly when Egypt's climate shifted from wet to dry, which is the entire foundation Schoch's argument depends on. None of this has produced a unanimous answer. What it has produced is a more precise, better documented disagreement, which again is genuinely how difficult scientific questions get resolved, slowly, through decades of accumulating evidence, not through a single dramatic discovery or a chatbot response. The Sphinx has been sitting on that plateau for thousands of years, watching civilizations rise, bury it, dig it back up, and argue about it. It'll probably still be sitting there, keeping at least part of its secret, long after this debate finally gets resolved, however many more decades that takes. If you enjoyed this deep exploration, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more stories where history gets a little stranger than we expected.